What happens if Canada's electricity demand suddenly doubles? What happens if AI data centers, electric vehicles, factories, and entire cities begin competing for power at the same time? And in a world where Donald Trump's America is becoming more protectionist, more transactional, and more unpredictable, is Canada now being forced to build its own independent energy future? Before we begin, subscribe to Canada Now for deep analysis on Canada, geopolitics, energy, Trump, and the global power shifts reshaping the world around us. Because what happened at this event was far bigger than a routine government announcement. This was not simply a speech about electricity. This was a blueprint for how Carney believes Canada must survive the next global era. And if you listen carefully to the language used throughout this event, you begin to realize something important. Canada's leadership increasingly believes the old world order is ending. The speech took place during a major gathering with electrical workers, union leaders, ministers, and energy stakeholders. But beneath the applause and policy language was a much deeper message: Canada is preparing for a future where energy security equals national security. And much of that urgency comes from the instability now emerging out of the United States under Donald Trump's political and economic influence. For decades, Canada operated under a simple assumption: America would remain the stable center of North American trade, energy, and economic reliability. But Trump's repeated tariff threats, economic pressure tactics, America first, nationalism, and increasingly transactional approach toward allies have deeply shaken that confidence. Steel tariffs, trade uncertainty, threats against Canadian industries, pressure on NATO allies, and constant political volatility. All of it has forced Canada to rethink how dependent it wants to remain on the United States. That reality was quietly sitting underneath almost every. Again and again, he repeated phrases like, "We must take care of ourselves. We must build big. We can control our future." Those are not accidental words. They are the language of a country preparing for strategic independence. And the centerpiece of that strategy is electricity. According to Carney, Canada's electricity demand could double by 2050. Think about what that actually means. Artificial intelligence data centers alone are consuming enormous amounts of power globally. Electric vehicles are accelerating demand. Factories are electrifying. Heating systems are moving away from fossil fuels. Entire industries are being redesigned around electricity. Meanwhile, global competition for energy dominance is intensifying. China is aggressively expanding clean energy infrastructure. Europe is rushing to reduce dependence on Russian energy after the Ukraine war. And Trump's America continues prioritizing domestic leverage over long-term allied stability. So Canada now finds itself facing a historic question. Can it build enough energy infrastructure fast enough to remain economically competitive and strategically sovereign? Carney's answer is clear. Canada must build. Not slowly. Not cautiously. But at a scale not seen in generations. And this is where the speech became especially revealing. Carney openly said Canada plans to double its electricity grid over the next 2 decades. That is an extraordinary national project. New hydro projects. New nuclear expansion. Massive transmission corridors. Wind farms. Solar developments. Carbon capture systems. Interprovincial power connections. And potentially new pipelines tied directly to Alberta's lower-emission oil ambitions. The scale being discussed is enormous. But Carney also understands something politically sensitive. Canadians are exhausted by rising costs. So unlike earlier climate-focused governments that often emphasized restrictions and prohibitions, Carney is trying to frame electrification as an affordability strategy. His message is simple. If Canada electrifies successfully, households could eventually spend less overall on energy. Electric systems are more efficient. Heat pumps reduce heating costs. Connected grids reduce wasted electricity. And domestic energy independence reduces vulnerability to foreign shocks. But behind the optimism lies a very real geopolitical fear. What if Canada does not move fast enough? Because globally, the race for energy dominance is accelerating. The United States is pouring billions into strategic industries under aggressive industrial policy. China dominates much of the critical mineral supply chain. Europe is scrambling to rebuild energy resilience after years of dependency. And Trump's political movement continues pushing America toward economic nationalism and self-interest first. That matters enormously for Canada. Because historically, Canada relied heavily on guaranteed American market stability. But Trump changed the psychology of that relationship. His tactics repeatedly showed Canada that even allies could suddenly face tariffs, pressure campaigns, or economic threats if Washington's political priorities shifted. And that uncertainty appears to be reshaping Ottawa's long-term strategy. Throughout the speech, Carney repeatedly emphasized sovereignty, resilience, and independence. Not separation from America, but protection from instability originating there. That distinction matters. At one point, Carney even referenced how fragmented Canada's own electricity system remains. In some cases, provinces trade electricity more easily with the United States than with each other. That revelation shocked many observers. Because it exposes how deeply North American integration shaped Canada's infrastructure decisions for decades. Now Ottawa wants to reverse some of that dependence by strengthening east-west and north-south domestic connections inside Canada itself. This is not just energy policy anymore. It is nation-building. And there was another striking element hidden inside the speech. The growing rehabilitation of natural gas. For years, parts of Canada's political class treated gas expansion almost exclusively as a climate problem. But Carney's language was noticeably more pragmatic. He openly acknowledged that some provinces will still require natural gas during the energy transition to maintain affordability and grid reliability. That is a major shift in tone. Especially at a time when global energy insecurity is forcing governments everywhere to become more realistic about balancing climate goals with economic survival. And this realism is appearing everywhere internationally. Germany restarted coal plants after losing Russian gas. Europe signed new LNG agreements despite climate rhetoric. Japan expanded long-term natural gas contracts. Even the Biden administration quietly increased fossil fuel production while publicly championing green transitions. Now Canada under Carney appears to be embracing a similar, all-of-the-above, strategy. Hydro. Nuclear. Wind. Solar. Natural gas. Carbon capture. Everything. Because in the new global environment, ideological purity matters less than energy reliability. And Trump's America helped accelerate that realization. His aggressive use of tariffs and economic leverage reminded allies everywhere that dependence can become vulnerability overnight. So Canada is responding by trying to build redundancy, resilience, and strategic autonomy. The Alberta portion of the speech was particularly important. Carney confirmed ongoing discussions around a major new pipeline tied to lower-emission Alberta oil and carbon capture infrastructure. But he added one key line. No pathways, no pipelines. That sentence reveals Ottawa's balancing act. Canada still wants energy expansion. But it wants expansion tied to emissions reduction and long-term industrial transformation. Whether that balance succeeds politically remains uncertain. Because the energy debate inside Canada remains deeply divided. Environmental groups fear large-scale fossil fuel expansion. Energy-producing provinces fear overregulation. Workers fear job insecurity. Consumers fear rising costs. And businesses fear investment uncertainty. Yet Carney is trying to present electrification as the one national project capable of connecting all those competing interests. Jobs. Manufacturing. Affordability. Climate goals. National sovereignty. Energy security. And global competitiveness. Everything flows through electricity. And perhaps the biggest takeaway from this speech is this. Canada's leadership increasingly believes the world is entering a far more unstable era, economically, geopolitically, and strategically. The old assumptions are fading. Cheap global trade is fading. Predictable alliances are fading. Energy certainty is fading. And Trump's political influence has become one of the clearest symbols of that shift. Not because Canada wants conflict with America, but because Trump's repeated, America first, tactics forced allies like Canada to confront an uncomfortable reality. What happens if the United States no longer acts like a predictable long-term partner? Carney's answer appears increasingly clear. Canada must become stronger, more self-reliant, more interconnected, and more energy independent before that uncertainty deepens further. And that may ultimately be what this entire electricity strategy is really about. Not just powering homes, but powering Canada's next geopolitical era. High Voltage subscribe to Canada Now for more deep analysis on Mark Carney, Trump, energy wars, Canada's future, and the global shifts reshaping the world.